Once upon a time, in a big city, there lived a rich woman named Mrs. Rose. She had a lot of money, a big house, and many cars. But there was one thing that made her happy more than anything else: her son, Daniel. Mrs. Rose and her husband had built a big company together. They worked hard and became very rich, but sadly, her husband died. Now, Mrs. Rose was alone with only her son. Daniel had gone to another country to study. He was a good boy. He studied hard and became very smart. Now, after many years, he was coming back home to run his father's company. But Mrs. Rose had a problem. She was worried. "Who will my son marry?" she thought. "I have seen many girls. They are beautiful outside, but their hearts are not good. They only want money. I don't want my son to marry a girl who only loves his money." Mrs. Rose thought and thought. Then she got an idea, a very clever idea. "I will dress up like a poor woman," she said to herself. "I will go to our company and work as a cleaner. Nobody will know who I am. Then I will see which girl has a good heart." So Mrs. Rose made a plan. She would test the girls who worked in the company. She would see who was kind and who was mean. Early one morning, Mrs. Rose woke up, but she didn't wear her expensive clothes. No, she wore old, torn clothes. She tied an old cloth on her head. She put on cheap rubber shoes. She took a mop and a bucket. Then she went to the company. When Mrs. Rose walked into the office, everyone stopped working. They all looked at her. Then they started laughing. "Who is this old woman?" one girl named Susan shouted. She was laughing very hard. "Maybe she got lost," another girl, Mary, said. "Maybe she thinks this is the market." All the girls laughed and laughed. They pointed at Mrs. Rose. They made fun of her old clothes. Mrs. Rose said nothing. She just started cleaning the floor. Her heart was sad, but she didn't show it. She had always been respected. People always bowed to her. But now these girls were laughing at her. But then Mrs. Rose noticed something. One girl was not laughing. Her name was Grace. Grace was sitting at her desk, working quietly. She didn't laugh. She didn't point. She just looked at Mrs. Rose with kind eyes. Then she went back to her work. Mrs. Rose watched Grace carefully. She thought, "This girl is different." The next day, Mrs. Rose came back to the office. Again, she wore her old clothes and carried her mop and bucket. The office was busy. Girls were talking, laughing, and drinking coffee. They all wore beautiful dresses and high-heel shoes. Their perfume filled the air. Mrs. Rose quietly cleaned the floor. Her back hurt, her arms hurt, but she kept working. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted, "Old woman, you missed a spot!" Mrs. Rose looked up. It was Susan. Standing with her was Mary. They both had their arms crossed. They were smiling, mean smiles. "Didn't you hear her?" Mary said. "Are you deaf too?" Mrs. Rose didn't say anything. She turned back to her work. But Susan was not finished. "Look how slow she is," Susan laughed. "We will be here all day," Mary giggled. "Maybe she needs help." Before Mrs. Rose could move, Susan pushed her, hard. Mrs. Rose fell to the ground. Her old body hit the cold floor. The mop flew out of her hands. The dirty water spilled everywhere. Everyone in the office started laughing, loud, mean laughter. "She's so clumsy," one girl shouted. "Maybe she needs a walking stick," another one said. Mrs. Rose lay on the floor. Her body hurt. She tried to get up, but her hands were shaking. Nobody helped her. Nobody cared. But then someone came. Grace ran over. She bent down and held Mrs. Rose's arm. Gently, she helped her stand up. "Are you okay, Mama?" Grace asked. Her voice was soft and worried. Mrs. Rose looked into Grace's eyes. They were kind. They were caring. They were different. "Thank you, my daughter," Mrs. Rose said quietly. Grace helped Mrs. Rose stand properly. She made sure the old woman was okay. Susan saw this and got angry. "Grace, why are you helping her? Let her clean up her own mess. But Grace ignored Susan. She bent down and picked up the wet mop. She squeezed the water into the bucket. Then she gave the mop back to Mrs. Rose. "Mama, please be careful," Grace whispered. Mrs. Rose felt warm inside. It had been so long since someone called her Mama with such love. Since her husband died, she had been lonely, very lonely. She looked around. Susan and Mary had gone back to their desks. They were giggling and putting on makeup. They didn't care. That night, Mrs. Rose lay in her bed thinking. Grace was different, very different, but she needed to test her more. She needed to be sure. The next morning, Mrs. Rose came to the office with something special. She had woken up very early and cooked food. It was simple food, rice and stew, the kind of food poor people eat. She put the food in an old bowl, then she went to the lunchroom. Mrs. Rose sat down and started eating. The smell of the food filled the room. Soon, Susan and Mary walked in. They stopped when they saw Mrs. Rose eating. "Ew, what is that smell?" Mary said, holding her nose. Susan looked at Mrs. Rose's food. "I think it's the cleaner's lunch." She made a disgusted face. "It smells so poor." The other girls laughed. Mrs. Rose kept eating. She pretended not to hear them. A few minutes later, Grace walked in. She had her lunchbox in her hand. She saw Mrs. Rose sitting alone. She saw Susan and Mary whispering and laughing. Grace walked straight to Mrs. Rose's table. "Good afternoon, Mama," Grace said with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, my daughter," Mrs. Rose replied. Grace sat down next to her. She opened her lunchbox. Inside was simple food too, just rice and beans, not expensive takeout like the other girls had. Susan's eyes got big. "Grace, you're actually going to sit with her?" Grace smiled. "Yes, why not?" She looked at Mrs. Rose's bowl. "Mama, that food looks delicious. Did you cook it yourself?" Mrs. Rose nodded. "Yes, my daughter. Would you like to taste it?" Grace's eyes lit up. "Really? Yes, please." Mrs. Rose took a spoon and gave Grace some of her food. The moment Grace put the food in her mouth, Susan burst out laughing. "Ha! Look at her! She's eating the cleaner's food. You have no shame, Grace." Mary laughed too. "You're going to get sick." Mrs. Rose watched Grace carefully. Would she spit it out? Would she make an excuse and leave? But Grace just chewed, swallowed, and smiled big. "Mama, this is wonderful. It tastes just like my grandmother's cooking." Something happened in Mrs. Rose's heart. It felt warm. It felt good. Later that day, Mrs. Rose had another test planned. She went to the ladies' bathroom. She carried her bucket of soapy water. She looked around to make sure people were nearby. Then, carefully, she spilled the water all over the floor. The water went everywhere. "Ah, my back!" Mrs. Rose cried out loudly. She held her back and bent over, pretending to be in pain. Within seconds, Susan and her friends came into the bathroom. When they saw Mrs. Rose struggling on the wet floor, they started laughing. "Oh no! The poor old woman fell again," Susan said in a fake, sad voice. Mary crossed her arms. "Maybe she's too old to work. She should just go home." Mrs. Rose groaned. "Please, someone help me." Susan shook her head. "We're not cleaners. It's not our job to clean up messes." All the girls laughed and laughed. Then, suddenly, Grace walked in. She saw the wet floor. She saw Mrs. Rose holding her back. She saw the other girls laughing. For a moment, everything was quiet. Mrs. Rose watched Grace closely. What would she do? Would she walk away to avoid embarrassment? But Grace didn't hesitate, not for 1 second. She rushed forward and knelt down next to Mrs. Rose. Mama, are you okay? Mrs. Rose groaned. My back, my daughter. I can't move. Grace's face filled with worry. She looked up at the other girls. Why are you just standing there? Help me! Susan laughed. Help a cleaner? Please! Grace's face became angry, but she didn't argue. She turned back to Mrs. Rose. Then something amazing happened. Grace pulled out her handkerchief. Gently, she wiped the sweat from Mrs. Rose's face. Then she rolled up her sleeves, and Grace started cleaning the floor herself. The whole bathroom went silent. Susan and Mary just stared. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Grace, are you crazy? Mary shouted. She's not your mother. But Grace ignored them. She kept cleaning until the floor was dry. Then, very carefully, she helped Mrs. Rose stand up. Come, Mama, let me help you sit down, Grace said softly. Mrs. Rose's heart was full, so full. This girl had a beautiful heart. That night, Mrs. Rose couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Grace. Grace was the one. She was sure of it now. But she needed to do one more test, the biggest test of all. The next morning, Grace arrived at work early like always. She greeted the security guard. She waved at the receptionist. She went to her desk. But before she could sit down, Mrs. Rose appeared next to her. Good morning, my daughter, Mrs. Rose said. Grace turned and smiled. Good morning, Mama. How are you today? Mrs. Rose looked at Grace for a long moment. Then she took a deep breath. My daughter, I need to ask you something. Grace's eyes got curious. Yes, Mama? What is it? Mrs. Rose looked down at her feet. She acted shy. You see, I live alone. I cook food, but eating alone is not nice. It makes me sad. Grace's face became sad too. Oh, Mama. Mrs. Rose continued. I was wondering, would you come to my house for dinner? Just once, as my guest. Grace blinked. Mama, you want me to visit your house? Mrs. Rose nodded slowly. The lunchroom had become very quiet. Susan and Mary, who had been on their phones, were now staring. Susan laughed. Grace, you want to eat in a cleaner's house? Mary giggled. She probably lives in a very small, poor house somewhere. Mrs. Rose stayed quiet. She watched Grace's face. Grace turned to Susan and Mary. Her voice was strong. So what if she's a cleaner? She's still a human being. She still deserves respect. Then Grace looked back at Mrs. Rose and smiled. Mama, I would love to come to your house for dinner. It would be an honor. Mrs. Rose's chest felt tight. She wanted to cry, but she held it in. Thank you, my daughter. Thank you so much. That evening, Grace stood outside Mrs. Rose's house. She was surprised. She had expected a small, broken house, maybe a tiny room. But this house was nice. It was neat and clean. The compound was beautiful. Who is this woman really? Grace thought. Mrs. Rose opened the door. She was smiling. Come in, my daughter. Grace went inside. The smell of delicious food filled the house. Rice, fried plantains, grilled fish. Everything smelled wonderful. The house was simple, but something felt different about it. It felt special, like there was more to this woman than she showed. They sat down and ate together. They talked about life, about family, about dreams. Grace never once asked about money. She never looked uncomfortable. She just enjoyed being with an old woman who needed company. And that's when Mrs. Rose knew for sure she had found the right girl for her son. Because soon Daniel would come home, and when he did, everything would change. The airport was full of people, Families were hugging, taxi drivers were shouting, bags were rolling everywhere. And walking out of the airport was a tall, handsome man in a nice blue suit. Daniel. He had been gone for over 10 years. He had studied hard. He had worked hard. Now he was back to run his father's company. When Daniel walked into the office, everything changed. Girls who had been lazy suddenly sat up straight. They fixed their skirts. They put on more lipstick. They smiled, big fake smiles. "He's so handsome," Mary whispered to Susan. Susan fixed her hair. "And rich. I must talk to him first." But Daniel barely noticed them. He was here to work, to continue his father's dream. As he walked through the office, he saw something that made him stop. An old woman was mopping the floor. She was bent over, working hard. Her hands looked rough and tired. Something didn't feel right. Daniel walked closer. "Excuse me, Mama," he said gently. "Why are you cleaning this floor? Where is the cleaning company we hired?" The old woman looked up, surprised that he cared. Before she could answer, Susan rushed over. "Oh, sir, don't worry about her," Susan said sweetly. "She's just a cleaner. She's used to this work." Daniel turned to Susan. His face became serious. "Used to it?" His voice was sharp. "Does that mean she shouldn't be treated with respect?" Susan's face went red. She didn't know what to say. Then a voice spoke up. "She deserves all the respect in the world." Daniel turned to see who said that. It was Grace. Their eyes met, and something happened inside Daniel's chest, something he had never felt before. She wasn't like the other girls. No heavy makeup, no fake smile, just real, kind, beautiful. Who is she? Daniel thought. Later that day, Mrs. Rose was in the small storage room, pretending to organize cleaning supplies, but really, she was listening. Susan and Mary were talking nearby. "Grace, how did you do it?" Mary asked. "You just spoke once and the boss noticed you," Susan smirked. "Are you sure you don't have some kind of magic? Because that man didn't even look at the rest of us." Grace sighed. "I didn't do anything special." "We'll see about that," Susan said. "But just know, if you're trying to get the boss to like you, you'll have competition." They walked away, giggling. Mrs. Rose clenched her fists. These girls were trouble, but there was no time to worry about them now. The real test was just beginning. Daniel sat in his big office. He should have been reading reports. The company had a lot of work to do, but he couldn't focus. He kept thinking about Grace, the girl from earlier. Finally, he picked up his phone and pressed a button. "Rose, please send Grace from the junior staff to my office." "Yes, sir, right away," the receptionist said. Downstairs, Grace froze. The boss wanted to see her? Her heart started beating fast. Did she do something wrong? Susan and Mary were staring at her with big eyes. "I told you," Susan whispered. "She must have magic." Grace ignored them. Her legs felt shaky as she walked to the elevator. She knocked softly on the big wooden door. "Come in," a deep voice called. Grace stepped inside. The office was huge. There were big windows with a beautiful view of the city, bookshelves everywhere. And behind the big desk sat Daniel. He was even more handsome up close. For a second, Grace forgot to breathe. "Good afternoon, sir," she said quickly, looking down. Daniel watched her carefully. "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable earlier," he said. "I just don't like seeing people treated unfairly." Grace looked up, surprised. That's why he noticed her? She smiled a little. "Thank you, sir. That was very kind." Daniel leaned forward. "How long have you worked here?" "A few months, sir." "And that cleaner, the old woman. You seem close to her." Grace's eyes brightened. "Mama Rose? Yes, she's a wonderful person, sir." Daniel's heart warmed. Mama Rose. Grace already loved her without knowing who she really was. "Tell me about her," Daniel said. And for the next few minutes, Grace talked. She talked about kindness, about respect, about treating everyone with dignity. The more she talked, the more Daniel knew. This was no ordinary girl. And without knowing it, Grace had just taken her first step into his world. But Mrs. Rose wasn't done yet. There were more tests to come. The office was buzzing with whispers. Grace had been called to the boss's office. The boss's office! Susan and Mary couldn't keep quiet. "I knew it," Susan whispered while putting on lip gloss. "She's been pretending this whole time, but really, she knows what she's doing." Mary flipped her hair. "Maybe she's just lucky." Susan made an angry face. "Lucky? In this world, people don't just get lucky. She's playing games, and I'll make sure she doesn't win." They both looked at Grace, who was quietly working at her desk. Mary walked over. "So, what did the boss say to you?" Grace barely looked up. "Nothing serious. He just asked about Mama Rose." Susan's eyes went big. "That old cleaner again? What is wrong with you? Instead of using the opportunity to impress him, you were talking about that old woman?" Grace sighed. She was tired of this conversation. "Mama Rose is a good person. I respect her, and I won't stop just because you don't like it." Susan crossed her arms. "You'll regret this." But Grace wasn't listening anymore. She had work to do. Later that evening, Mrs. Rose sat in her house looking at a pot of soup. She was expecting Grace. Grace had agreed to come for dinner again. Just as she was about to serve the food, there was a soft knock. "Come in, my daughter," Mrs. Rose called. Grace stepped inside, smiling. "Mama, something smells so good." Mrs. Rose laughed. Sit down. Today we're eating well." As Grace settled in, Mrs. Rose looked at her carefully. She had seen how the other girls treated Grace. She had seen the jealousy, the mean words, and she knew something bad was coming, something that would test Grace's heart. So before they started eating, Mrs. Rose put her hand on Grace's hand. She looked into her eyes. "My daughter," Mrs. Rose said softly, "be careful." Grace frowned. "Mama, what do you mean?" Mrs. Rose sighed. "You are a good person, but not everyone will be happy for you. Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend." Grace swallowed. She knew that was true. Then her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't know. "Meet me at Grand Royal Hotel tomorrow at 7 p.m. Alone. I have something important to tell you." Grace frowned. "Mama, someone just sent me a strange message." Mrs. Rose leaned forward. "What does it say?" Grace read it out loud. Mrs. Rose's face became serious. She had a bad feeling, but she just smiled. "Be careful, my daughter. Not everything that shines is gold." The next day, Grace arrived at the Grand Royal Hotel. Her heart was beating fast. Who sent that message? Why did they want to meet her here? As she walked inside, she saw someone sitting at a table in the corner. Susan. Grace's stomach sank. She should have known. Susan smiled a mean smile. "Ah, Grace, you came." Grace crossed her arms. "What do you want?" Susan leaned forward. "Listen carefully. If you know what's good for you, you'll stay away from Daniel." Grace blinked. "Stay away? I don't even know him like that." Susan laughed coldly. "Don't act stupid. The boss has already noticed you. And we both know it's only a matter of time before he starts liking you more." Grace shook her head. "This is ridiculous." Susan's eyes became dark. "No, Grace. What's ridiculous is you thinking you have a chance with him." She pushed a brown envelope across the table. Grace's heart pounded. Slowly, She opened it. Inside was money. A lot of money. Grace's hands started shaking. Her rent was due. Her little brother needed money for school. Her mother was sick and needed medicine. This money could solve everything. She swallowed hard. Then, with steady hands, she pushed the money back. No. Susan's face filled with rage. "You're making a mistake." Grace stood up. "No, Susan, you are making a mistake." She turned and walked away, her heart racing. Susan had tried to buy her, and Grace had said no. But Grace didn't know someone else had been watching, in the far corner of the restaurant, hiding behind dark sunglasses. Mrs. Rose sat drinking her tea. She had seen everything, and now she was certain. Grace was the one. The night air was cool, but Grace felt hot inside. She had just said no to money, money that could have changed her life. Her mind was spinning. She could barely think. Why was this happening? She wasn't trying to chase Daniel. She wasn't like Susan and the others. So why were they so threatened by her? She got home, exhausted. As she was about to fall asleep, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Grace's stomach turned. She put the phone down and closed her eyes, whispering a quiet prayer. Something told her this was only the beginning. Grace came to work early the next morning, like always. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt it. Something was very wrong. People were staring, whispering. Some were laughing. She frowned. What was going on? Then she saw Susan standing in the middle of the office. Susan was holding her phone high in the air. "Everyone, please listen to this," Susan announced. She pressed a button. Suddenly, Grace's own voice filled the office. "Daniel is already noticing you, and we both know it's only a matter of time before he starts liking you more. This is ridiculous. No, Susan, you are making a mistake." The audio had been edited, twisted. Susan had made it sound like Grace was bragging about Daniel chasing her. The office exploded with laughter. "So that innocent face was all fake," someone shouted. "She's just like the rest of us, but pretending to be humble," another one said. Grace's face burned with shame. Her hands turned into fists. Susan walked closer. Her eyes were shining with victory. "I warned you," she whispered. Grace felt tears come to her eyes, but she held them back. She wouldn't let Susan break her. Not like this. Daniel had just finished a meeting when he heard the noise. He stepped into the office space, confused. "What's going on here?" he asked. The laughter stopped immediately. People turned away, pretending to work. Daniel's sharp eyes looked around the room. Then he saw Grace. She was standing there, stiff and silent. Something was wrong. His eyes moved to Susan. "What happened?" he asked. Susan smiled sweetly. "Oh, nothing, sir. We were just having some fun with Grace." Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes became dark. "Susan." His voice was calm but firm. "Step into my office. Now." Susan's face went pale. She tried to laugh. "Oh, sir, it was just a joke." "I said now." The entire office went silent. Daniel turned to Grace. His voice became softer. "Are you okay?" Grace swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." But deep down she wasn't. She had just been embarrassed in front of everyone, and she knew this wouldn't be the last time. Mrs. Rose had seen everything. She had been standing in the hallway, watching as Susan publicly humiliated Grace. Her blood boiled. How dare they treat Grace like this? Grace had done nothing wrong. That evening, as she sat with Grace for dinner, she spoke in a quiet but strong voice. "My daughter," she said, "tell me the truth. Do you have feelings for Daniel?" Grace almost choked on her food. "Mama, what? No! I barely know him." Mrs. Rose studied her face. She was telling the truth. She sighed and put her hand on Grace's hand. "Then listen to me carefully." Grace nodded. "These girls will not stop," Mrs. Rose said. "They want to destroy you. You must be strong." Grace's eyes became soft. "Mama, why do you care so much about me?" Mrs. Rose hesitated. She couldn't tell Grace the truth, not yet. She just smiled. "Because, my daughter, I see something special in you." Grace smiled back. But neither of them knew the worst was yet to come, because someone else had decided to join the game. And soon, the truth would change everything. The office was strangely quiet the next morning. Susan walked in confidently. Her high heels clicked on the floor. She had won yesterday. Grace had been embarrassed. Daniel had noticed her, yes, but in the worst way possible. Now all she had to do was act innocent. Everything was going according to plan. But the moment she sat at her desk, something strange happened. She felt a presence, like someone was watching her. She turned around. There, standing near the cleaning supplies, was Mama Rose. The old cleaner was staring at her, not with the usual humility, not with the usual silence. There was something in her eyes, something knowing. Susan swallowed. "What are you looking at, old woman?" she snapped. Mrs. Rose didn't speak. She just smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Then, without a word, she picked up her mop and walked away. Susan shivered. Why did she feel scared? Daniel sat at his desk, lost in thought. He kept thinking about Grace. She had been humiliated yesterday, but she hadn't fought back. She had simply held her head high and walked away. That kind of strength, it wasn't common. He pressed the intercom. "Rose, call Grace to my office." Downstairs, Grace sighed when she got the message. Again, why did the boss keep calling her? She gathered her courage and walked up. When she entered, Daniel was looking out the window. He turned when he heard her. "Sit." Grace obeyed. Her heart was pounding. Daniel looked at her for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Daniel sighed. "I know what happened yesterday, and I want you to know I won't allow bullying in this company." Grace blinked. Was he defending her? She looked down. "Thank you, sir, but I don't want any trouble." Daniel leaned forward. "Sometimes trouble finds you," he said softly. Grace's breath caught. For the first time, she realized something. Daniel wasn't just kind. He was watching, and something in his eyes told her he wasn't going to stop. That night, Susan tossed and turned in her sleep. She kept dreaming of Mama Rose, the old woman's eyes, that smile. It haunted her. At exactly 3 a.m., Susan woke up screaming. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You have touched the wrong person." Susan's hands shook. She looked around her dark room. No one was there, but she felt it. Someone was watching her. She wasn't safe, not anymore. The next morning, the sun was barely up when Grace heard a knock at her door. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Who could it be this early? When she opened the door, she froze. 2 police officers stood outside. Her heart dropped. "Are you Grace Miller?" one of them asked. "Yes," she whispered. Fear crept into her voice. You're under arrest for theft and fraud. Grace's breath caught. What? Before she could react, cold handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Tears came to her eyes as neighbors peeked out, whispering. I didn't do anything, she cried. The officers didn't listen. And just like that, Grace's world shattered. At the police station, Grace sat in a cold, dark cell. Her mind was spinning. How had this happened? She had never stolen anything in her life. A guard appeared. Someone posted your bail. Grace's eyes widened. Who? The guard shrugged. She's waiting outside. Confused and afraid, Grace followed him out. The moment she stepped into the waiting area, she gasped. Mama Rose. The old woman stood there, arms crossed, eyes full of sadness. Grace's lip trembled. Mama, I swear I didn't do it. Mrs. Rose stepped forward and wiped a tear from Grace's cheek. I know, my daughter, she said softly. I know. Grace broke down, crying into Mrs. Rose's arms. But even as she cried, she didn't know. This was only the beginning. Daniel sat in his office, scrolling through his phone. Then a headline made his stomach drop. Junior staff Grace Miller arrested for fraud. His heart stopped. No, he whispered. This didn't make sense. He grabbed his car keys and stormed out of the building. He needed to see her, now. Across town, Susan sat in a fancy hotel room, sipping expensive juice. Mary sat beside her, scrolling through her phone. Daniel left the office in a hurry, Mary said. People are saying he's going to see Grace. Susan smirked. Let him, she said. By the time I'm done, Grace will be nothing. Mary hesitated. Susan, are you sure about this? Framing someone is dangerous. Susan's eyes flashed. I warned her, she said coldly. She should have taken the money. Mary swallowed hard. Something about Susan's voice scared her. But it was too late to turn back now. The damage was done. And soon, Wendy's life would completely fall apart. Mrs. Rose sat with Grace in her small house. She watched as Grace wiped away fresh tears. Why is this happening to me? Grace whispered. What did I do wrong? Mrs. Rose's heart ached. She wanted to tell Grace the truth, that she wasn't just a poor cleaner, that she was the owner of the company, that her son was Daniel, that she had been testing Grace all along. But the time wasn't right. Instead, she gently held Grace's hand. My daughter, she said softly. Sometimes when life tests you, it means something greater is coming. Grace looked at her with tired eyes. But what if I fail? Mrs. Rose smiled. Then you stand up and try again. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Rose tensed. Grace frowned and stood to open it. The moment she did, her breath caught. Daniel stood outside. His eyes were full of worry. For a second, they just stared at each other. Then Daniel stepped inside. I need to know the truth, he said softly. Grace swallowed hard. She had nothing left. Would he believe her? Or was this the final end? Grace stood frozen at the doorway, staring at Daniel. Her heart pounded. She never expected him to come. Not after everything. Daniel stepped inside. His face was serious. Grace, he said, his voice softer than she expected. Tell me the truth. Did you steal the money? Tears burned Grace's eyes. No, she whispered. I didn't. Daniel looked at her face. There was no hesitation in her voice, no guilt. He wanted to believe her, but the evidence, it was strong. The company's money, people had found missing money. They traced it to Grace's bank account. Large amounts of money. money Grace couldn't possibly have earned. Even the police had been convinced. Daniel's voice trembled. "Grace, someone framed you?" Grace nodded. "Yes, someone framed me." Daniel studied her. "Do you know who?" Grace hesitated. Her gut told her Susan was behind this, but there was no proof, and after what Susan had already done to her, she knew how dangerous Susan could be. Daniel noticed her hesitation. His face darkened. "Grace, if you're lying to me—" "I swear I'm not lying," Grace cried. Her voice broke. "I don't know how that money got into my account. I swear on my life." Daniel flinched at the raw pain in her voice. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned toward the door. "I'll investigate," he said quietly. "If I find out you're telling the truth, I'll make sure the real thief pays." And just like that, he was gone. Grace stood in the middle of the room. Her heart was shattered. Meanwhile, Susan sat at a fancy restaurant, sipping her drink, feeling victorious. Wendy was ruined. By tomorrow, she would be jobless. And soon, Daniel would forget all about her. But just as she was about to take another sip, her phone rang. She frowned. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A deep, raspy voice whispered through the phone. "You have made a terrible mistake." Susan's blood ran cold. Her throat went dry. "Who is this?" she demanded. No answer. Just the sound of slow breathing. Then, click. The call ended. Susan sat frozen, gripping the phone tightly. A chill ran down her spine. Something felt wrong. Very, very wrong. The next morning, Daniel sat in his office. His mind was racing. Something wasn't adding up. If Grace really stole the money, why didn't she run away? Why did she look genuinely broken when he confronted her? He rubbed his temples. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start. He picked up his phone. "Security?" "Yes, sir." "Pull up the CCTV footage from Grace's office area." There was a pause, then, "Sir, there's a problem." Daniel frowned. "What problem?" "All the footage from that week is missing." Daniel's blood ran cold. "Missing?" "Yes, sir. Someone erased it." Daniel's heart pounded. Someone had deleted the evidence. And suddenly, Daniel knew. Grace had been telling the truth all along. He had made a terrible mistake. He had doubted her, accused her. And now, it was time to make things right. But what Daniel didn't know was that someone was already one step ahead of him. And the truth? The truth was about to explode. Daniel stood up from his desk, his mind made up. He had to find out who framed Grace, and he had to do it fast. He called his head of security. "I want you to investigate every single person who had access to the company accounts that week. Check their bank records. Check everything." "Yes, sir, right away." Daniel hung up and stared out the window. His jaw was tight. Whoever did this to Grace was going to pay. Across town, Grace sat in Mrs. Rose's small living room. She hadn't gone to work. She couldn't face anyone. Mrs. Rose brought her a cup of tea. "Drink, my daughter." Grace took the cup with shaking hands. "Mama, what if Daniel doesn't believe me? What if no one believes me?" Mrs. Rose sat down beside her. "The truth always comes out, my daughter. Always." Grace looked at her. "But what if it comes too late?" Mrs. Rose smiled gently. "Then we trust that God's timing is perfect." Grace wanted to believe that, but right now, everything felt hopeless. Her phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. "You should have taken the money when you had the chance. Now you'll lose everything." Grace's hands trembled. She showed the message to Mrs. Rose. Mrs. Rose's face became hard. She had seen enough. "My daughter," she said firmly, "it's time I told you the truth." Grace looked up, confused. "What truth, Mama?" Mrs. Rose took a deep breath. "I am not just a cleaner." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" Before Mrs. Rose could answer, there was a loud knock on the door. Both women jumped. Mrs. Rose went to open it. Standing outside was Daniel, and behind him were 2 police officers. But these officers weren't there to arrest Grace. They were holding someone else, Susan. Susan's face was pale. Her hands were in handcuffs. Mascara ran down her face from crying. Grace stood up, shocked. What's happening?" Daniel stepped inside. His face was serious, but his eyes were softer now. "Grace," he said, "I owe you an apology. You were right. Someone did frame you." He turned to look at Susan. "And we found out who." Susan's face crumbled. "It wasn't just me," she screamed. "Mary helped too. And she looked around desperately. Daniel's voice was like ice. "The bank records don't lie, Susan. You transferred company money into Grace's account. Then you reported it as theft." Susan started crying. I just wanted you to notice me. Grace was getting all your attention." Daniel's face showed no sympathy. "Take her away." The officers led Susan out. Her cries echoed down the hallway. Grace couldn't believe it. It was over. She was free. She looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel stepped closer. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I should have trusted you from the beginning." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He turned to Mrs. Rose and smiled. "Hello, Mama." Mrs. Rose smiled back. "Hello, my son." Grace's head snapped up. "What?" Daniel chuckled. "Grace, I'd like you to meet my mother, Mrs. Rose, the owner of the company." Grace's mouth fell open. She looked at Mrs. Rose, then at Daniel, then back at Mrs. Rose. "Mama? You're his mother?" Mrs. Rose stepped forward and took Grace's hands. "Yes, my daughter. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted to see who had a true heart, who would be kind to an old woman, even when there was nothing to gain." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "All this time." Mrs. Rose wiped Grace's tears. "All this time, you showed me exactly who you are. Kind, humble, strong. You are everything I could have hoped for." Daniel stepped closer to Grace. "My mother has been testing the girls in the office, looking for someone worthy, someone real." He paused, his eyes locked on Grace's. "And she found you." Grace couldn't speak. Her heart was too full. Mrs. Rose smiled. "My son needs a woman who will love him for who he is, not for his money. Someone with a good heart." She squeezed Grace's hands. "I believe that woman is you." Daniel moved even closer. "Grace, I know this is all happening so fast, but from the moment I saw you defend my mother, not knowing who she was, I knew you were different." Grace's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "I would like to know you better," Daniel said softly. "If you'll let me." Grace looked at Mrs. Rose. Mrs. Rose nodded encouragingly. Then Grace looked back at Daniel. And for the first time in days, she smiled. A real, genuine smile. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Mrs. Rose clapped her hands together. "Wonderful! Now, let's celebrate. I'll cook a big meal." Daniel laughed. "Mama, you don't have to cook. We can go to a restaurant." Nonsense, Mrs. Rose said. The best food is made with love at home. Grace laughed through her tears. Everything had changed so fast. Just this morning, she thought her life was over. Now she was standing in the home of the woman who owned the company, the woman who had tested her and found her worthy. And the woman's son, her boss, was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. 3 months later, the office had changed completely. Grace was no longer a junior staff member. Mrs. Rose had promoted her to Daniel's assistant. Mary had been fired along with Susan. The company had no room for people who hurt others. Grace and Daniel worked together every day. Slowly, carefully, they got to know each other. He took her to dinner. She met his friends. He met her family. And every Sunday, Grace still had dinner with Mrs. Rose, just the two of them, talking, laughing, sharing. Mrs. Rose had found what she was looking for. Not just a wife for her son, but a daughter for herself. One evening, as they all sat together in Mrs. Rose's house, Daniel reached across the table and took Grace's hand. "Grace," he said, his voice nervous. "There's something I want to ask you." Grace's heart skipped. She looked at him. Daniel took a deep breath. Then he got down on one knee. Mrs. Rose gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Grace," Daniel said, pulling out a small box. "You came into my life when I wasn't looking for anyone. You showed kindness to my mother when she was disguised as a cleaner. You stayed true to yourself even when others tried to break you." He opened the box. Inside was a beautiful ring that sparkled in the light. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Grace's face. She looked at Mrs. Rose, who was crying too, nodding encouragingly. Grace looked back at Daniel. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Daniel stood and slipped the ring on her finger. Then he pulled her into his arms. Mrs. Rose stood and wrapped her arms around both of them. "My children," she whispered. "My beautiful children." And in that moment, everything made sense. The tests, the trials, the pain, it had all led to this. Grace had fed a poor old woman, not knowing she was caring for her future mother-in-law. And because of her kind heart, she had gained not just a husband, but a family. A real family who loved her, not for what she had, but for who she was. And they all lived happily ever after.